This next story in A Fine and Pleasant Misery is called How to Fish a Crick. There's much confusion in the world today concerning creeks and cricks. Many otherwise well-informed people live out their lives under the impression that a crick is a creek, mispronounced. Nothing could be farther from the truth. A crick is a distinctly separate entity from a creek, and it should be recognized as such. After all, a creek is merely a creek, but a crick is a crick. The extent of this confusion over cricks and creeks becomes apparent from a glance at almost any map, where you will find that all streams except rivers are labeled as creeks. There are several reasons for this injustice. First, your average run-of-the-mill cartographer doesn't know his crick from his creek. The rare cartographer who does know refuses to recognize cricks in their own right for fear that he will be chastised by one of the self-appointed chaperones of the American language, who, like all other chaperones, are big on purity. Case in point, one of the maps I possess of the state of Washington labels a small stream as S Creek. Now I don't know for certain, but I am reasonably sure that the actual name of the stream is not S. No, just by looking at the map, one can tell that it is not shaped like an S. The only reason I could think of for giving it such a name, S, therefore, must not be full name but an abbreviation. Why was the name abbreviated? Was it too long or perhaps too difficult to pronounce? Since the map also contains such stream names as Similakeen and Humptulips and Puyallup, all abbreviated, one would guess not. This leaves only one other possibility. The cartographers felt the actual name of the stream was obscene. They did not want it said of them that they had turned out an obscene map. The kind of map sinister characters might try to peddle to innocent school children, hissing at them from an alleyway. "Hey kid, wanna buy a dirty map?" Well, I can certainly sympathize with cartographers' reluctance to author a dirty map. What irks me is they use the name S Creek. One does not have to be a mentalist to know that the fellow who named the stream S did not use the word creek. He used crick. He probably saw right off that his stream he was that this stream he was up was a crick, and immediately started casting about for a suitable name. When he discovered he didn't have a paddle with him, he would name this crick after the most famous of all cricks, thereby not only symbolizing his predicament, but also capturing a word something of the crick's essential character. The cartographer, in any case, chose to ignore this rather obvious origin of the name and connotations in favor of the discrete S and the effete creek. If they didn't want to come right out and say crick, why couldn't they have the decency to abbreviate it with a C and let it go at that? Maybe I can, once and for all, clear up this confusion over cricks and creeks. First of all, a creek has none of the raucous, vulgar, free-willing character of a crick. If they were people, creeks would wear tuxedos, amuse themselves with the ballet, opera, witty conversation. Cricks would go around with their undershirts and amuse themselves with the Saturday night fights, taverns, and humorous belching. Creeks would perspire and cricks would sweat. Creeks would smoke pipes. Cricks chew and spit. Creeks tend to be pristine. They meander regally through high mountain meadows, cascade down dainty waterfalls, pause in placid pools, ripple over beds of gleaming gravel and polished rock. They sparkle in the sunlight. Deer and poets sip from creeks, and images of eagles wheel upon the surface of their mirrored depths. Creeks, on the other hand, shuffle through cow pastures, slog through beaver dams, gurgle through culverts, ooze through barnyards, sprawl under sagging bridges, and when not otherwise occupied, thrash fitfully on their beds of quicksand and clay. Cows should perhaps be credited about giving cricks the most pronounced characteristic. In defense to the young and few ladies left in the world whose sensitivities might be offended, I forego a detailed description of this characteristic. Let me just say that only the cow say only that to a cow the whole universe is a bathroom, and it makes no exception of cricks. A single cow equipped with only with determination and fairly good aim can, in a matter of hours, transform a perfectly good creek into a crick. Now that some of the basic differences between creeks and cricks have been cleared up, I will get down to the business at hand, namely how to fish a crick. Every angler knows how to fish a creek. He uses relatively light tackle and flies, and his attire consists of waders or hip boots, a fishing vest, creel, lightweight slacks, and a shirt in a tasteful check. The creek is worked artfully, with the fly drifting down like the first flake of winter snow. Everybody knows that's how you fish a creek. But the crick, as I pointed out, is an altogether different species of water, and demands its own particular approach. No fancy tackle of any kind is ever used to fish a crick. Since fiberglass rods came on the market, it is difficult to find a good crick pole. The old steel telescope rods were fairly good, but the best crick pole I've ever seen was one I owned as a kid. It consisted of a 6-foot section of stiff pipe, with a piece of wire had been pulled out from the tip to provide the action. Stores sold it as a fishing pole, but it would also serve fairly well as a lightning rod, fence post, or a lever for prying a car out of the mud. Rod action, it would be noted, is of little importance to crick fishing, since the crick itself usually provides about all the action one can stand. Hook size should never be less than number 4. The leaders, if they are used at all, should be short and test about the same as baling wire. This saves a good deal of time, since you hook on an old log, tractor tire, or Model T submerged in the creek, as happens every third cast. You can simply haul it out and not have to bother replacing leader and hook. Sinkers must be large and fat in order to not frighten off the fish. If the splash is large enough, they think it's just another old log, tractor, or Model T being dumped into the creek. The reel should be an old bait caster, with the worm gear busted and the handle off. A crick reel, if you don't happen to own one, can be improvised by loaning a perfectly good creek reel to one of your kids for a period of 1 to 5 minutes. The experienced crick fisher never wears hip boots or waders on a crick. Old Oxfords with flappy tongues are all right, but tennis shoes in the final stages of decay are the first choice of crick fishers everywhere. Whatever shoes you select, they should have sizable holes both fore and aft. The holes allow for good circulation of the creek water through the shoe and help to cut down on the risk of fermentation of the feet. Another advantage that the crick fisher can thrust his toes out through the holes and get good grip on banks and submerged clay, rotting logs, old tractor tires, and Model Ts. The creel is shunned in crick fishing. All fish are carried on a forked stick, and which adds immeasurably to the enjoyment of the sport. Most of this enjoyment comes from laying the forked stick down, forgetting it, and then spending several happy hours looking for it. Once the crick fisher tires of his pastime, he usually vows to keep the stick in hand at all times. This brings into play the ultimate in crick fishing skill, since the angler must now land his fish by taking up his slack line with his teeth and one ear, accomplished by a quick dipping circular motion of the head. Flies, of course, are never used in a crick. The crick fisher just guffaw at them. They want real meat, fat wiggling worms, grasshoppers on the hoof, and occasionally toes. That pretty much covers the technique of crick fishing. Naturally, one cannot expect to master it so quickly as creek fishing, unless, of course, he happens to be under the age of 14. 8-year-olds are naturals at crick fishing, and if you have one handy, you might take him out to a crick and observe him in action. Despite the opinion of all parents and most behavioral psychologists, 8-year-olds are good for something, and teaching the art of crick fishing is it. At least once a year I try to fish Sand Crick, the crick of my youth. Admittedly, I have lost a good deal of my technique and most of my stamina, but I still manage to have a good time. Usually I come back with a few fish, some good laughs, and a Charlie horse that extends from my trapezius to my peroneus longus. Last summer, my cousin Buck accompanied me, and I got one of those terrible scares that only a crick fishing can give you. We had no more than started when Buck stepped into quicksand. It startled him so badly he could only manage to get off 3 or 4 casts before total panic set in. The quicksand by then was halfway up to his knees. "Hey," Buck said, "I don't think I'll be able to get out." A cold chill shot through me. Not only was a lifelong friend and relative in peril, but he was carrying the communal worm can. "Quick," I yelled, "toss me the worm can." "Nothing doing," Buck said. "Not till you drag me out of here." I wasted a good 10 minutes of fishing time getting him out of that quicksand. On the other hand, I probably would have used up more time than that digging a new batch of worms besides having to knock off a little early to tell his wife there was no point in waiting supper on him. Incidentally, in order to prevent a similar emergency from occurring, I took the precaution of putting a handful of worms in my shirt pocket, where they were eventually discovered by my wife on wash day. It is interesting to note that dehydrated worms cannot be reconstituted by even 3 cycles of automatic washer. Also, the interest is the fact that it is almost as difficult to reconstitute the wife who conducts the experiment. After such an occurrence, the wise through absent-minded crick fisher should take care to eat all his meals out for several days, and in the unlikely event that his wife does offer him something to eat, he should first give a bite to the dog and observe the animal carefully for a couple of hours afterwards. Buck and I fished a couple miles of Sand Crick together that day, reminiscing every step of the way over our adventures as kids along the same creek. We came upon a half-submerged car, a 1937 Packard, that someone had dumped in the creek under the pretext of preventing bank erosion, but actually to get rid of a 1937 Packard. Buck drifted his line through the gaping holes in the front windshield and hooked a fine eastern brook out of the back seat. First time I ever caught anything in the back of the seat of a 1937 Packard, he said. I've never been that lucky, I said enviously. But I came pretty close once on the 48 Hudson. The last hole of the day was one known affectionately as the dead cow hole. The particular cow that the hole was named after was one of the most malicious beasts ever to deface the banks of a creek. I don't know what the farmer called his cow, but I know some of the names fishermen called her, always preceded by the same presumably accurate adjective. You always knew when a fellow planned on fishing the stretch of creek presided over by the cow, because he carried his fishing pole in one hand and an axe handle in the other. Usually you could get in at least one good blow each time the cow galloped over on top of you. Then one day the cow took ill and died. Thus, or so I thought, effectively removing herself from action. The news reached me in a sweltering summer day, but nevertheless, I made ready immediately to take advantage of the cow's misfortune. I scarcely touched the tops of withered grass with my rush to get a line in the water. As I neared the creek, however, I noticed a flock of magpies flying hurriedly in the opposite direction, and several of them, I observed, showed definite signs of nausea. At about the same time, a hot, dry gust of wind criminally assaulted my olfactory nerves with such violence to bring tears to my eyes. No, I thought, could it be? Could she actually have been that fiendish? The question was shortly answered in the affirmative. On peering down from the top of the hill above the creek, I could see her carcass ripening in the summer heat, not 10 yards away from the fishing hole. Evidently, she had seen the end coming, and rather than spend her last moments repenting her sins she had, or malice with malice aforethought, she used them to drag herself into a strategic position so that, even in death, she would dominate not only the immediate area of the fishing hole, but 400 yards on all sides. Several times I took a deep breath and tried to rush the hole with my wind always, but my wind always gave out before I could cover the distance. It was hopeless. At least for me. Cousin Buck did manage to fish Dead Cow Hole that same summer, and with considerable success, apparently. He told me about a week later, I believe, he said he caught a couple of good fish. I couldn't be sure because he was still gagging so hard it was difficult to understand him. That's the nature of creek fishing, though. Some people may not have the heart for it, or even the stomach, but for those who do, it has its rewards. They escape me at every moment, however. Alright, that was a good one.